A cop slapped a woman in a crowded gym. 23 people watched. Nobody said a word. What he didn't know was that she was ranked third in the country in professional MMA, and that someone in that room had already pressed record. Like and subscribe, because this story doesn't end the way he expected. There is a kind of silence that is not peaceful. It is not the silence of a library or a church or an empty field at dawn. It is the silence of a room full of people who have made a collective decision, fast, wordless, unanimous, to become furniture, to stop being witnesses, to look away so completely that they can later tell themselves and almost believe it that they did not see what they saw. That was the silence inside Steelworks Gym on a Wednesday afternoon in late October, when everything that came after was still just beginning, still just a lit match held above dry grass, still just a man named Cole Hartman crossing a rubber floor with a protein shaker in one hand, and a grin already forming on his face, before he had even decided what he was going to do with the other. Steelworks Gym sat on the corner of Chester Avenue and 18th Street in Bakersfield, California, in a building that had been, over the course of its life, a tire warehouse, a bingo hall, and briefly, optimistically, a dance studio. The current incarnation had been in operation for 11 years, under the ownership of Gary Sutter, a broad, quiet man in his late 50s, who wore the same gray polo shirt 4 days out of 5, and who had a talent for making people feel that his gym was exactly the kind of place they had always been looking for. The equipment was solid. The membership was affordable. The clientele was a cross-section of Bakersfield working life, nurses coming off night shifts, construction workers burning off tension, a rotating cast of young men who arrived in groups and trained in bursts of loud, competitive energy before dissolving back into their afternoons. And then there was Zara Dupree. She had been coming to Steelworks since she was 20 years old. 8 years of early mornings and late evenings, 8 years of bleeding knuckles and taped wrists, 8 years of sessions that ended with her flat on the mat, staring at the water-stained ceiling tiles, because she had given everything she had, and then found something more to give. She was 28 now, 5'9", built the way only years of disciplined, intentional work could build a person, lean and powerful, the kind of body that looked at rest but was never actually resting. She wore a red sports bra fitted with a modest scoop neckline and wide straps that framed her collarbone the way athletic wear is designed to: functional, structured, made for movement. High-waist black shorts stopped mid-thigh. Her hair was pulled back. Her earbuds were in. She had arrived at 2:15, changed in the locker room, and walked out to the main floor with her mind already on the footwork patterns. She intended to run because today was a light day. 6 weeks out from the most important fight of her career, and light days required their own kind of focus. She noticed Cole Hartman the moment she stepped onto the floor. It would have been impossible not to. He was 36 wide across the shoulders, with the easy, occupying confidence of a man who had never once walked into a room and felt he needed permission to take up space. He was a detective with the Bakersfield Police Department, a fact he wore the way some men wear expensive watches, not for function but for the particular satisfaction of knowing others can see it. He trained at Steelworks 2 or 3 times a week with his partner Rick Doyle, and together they treated the gym the way certain men treat any shared space they have decided belongs to them. Weights left loaded. Conversations held at full volume. A general unspoken assumption that their comfort was the room's first priority. Zara had known men like Hartman her entire life. She put her earbuds in and she went to work. She ran footwork drills for 20 minutes, quiet and self-contained. Then she moved to the heavy bags. Then the squat rack. She was on her 3rd set when she needed water. She racked the bar, pulled one earbud out, and walked toward the fountain near the far wall. It was a 12-second walk. Unremarkable. The kind of thing a person does 40 times in a session without a single thought. Hartman was coming from the opposite direction. He had the shaker in his right hand. He was saying something to Doyle over his shoulder, laughing at his own sentence before it was finished. Their paths crossed at the edge of the squat platform. What happened next took less than 2 seconds. His left palm came down hard and deliberate across the back of her shorts, a full, open-handed slap that cracked off the rubber mats and the metal racks and echoed under the fluorescent lights like a sound designed to be heard by everyone in the room. He was still grinning when he said it. "Dress for attention, get attention, sweetheart." Doyle doubled over. Gary Sutter, standing 15 feet away, behind the front desk, looked up from his clipboard. His eyes met Hartman's for exactly 1 second, and then he looked back down. Not one person spoke. Not one person moved. 23 people found somewhere else to look. Zara Dupree stopped walking. Every muscle in her body went still in the way that only happens with elite athletes not frozen with shock, but coiled, controlled a stillness that is the opposite of stillness. She turned around slowly, and across the room, a 29-year-old photographer named Simone Vega, who had her phone in her hand because she always had her phone in her hand, wrapped her fingers around it a little tighter and pressed record. The thing about Zara Dupree that most people in that gym did not know, could not have known because she had never once offered it as information, and never would, was that she had been ranked third in the country in professional MMA for the past 14 months, and that the ranking had been earned through a specific, cumulative, almost surgical kind of suffering that most people would not choose and could not sustain. 15 wins, 2 losses, both in her first 2 professional years before her footwork caught up with her instincts, before Coach Leon Briggs had spent 3 months drilling a specific diagonal step into her muscle memory, until it stopped being a technique and started being the way her body thought. Since those 2 early losses, 13 straight. 7 by TKO, 3 by submission, 3 by unanimous decision, the kind where all 3 judges gave her every single round and the opposing corner was already talking about what went wrong before the final bell. She had started fighting competitively at 19 in a converted storage room at the Eastside Community Recreation Center in Bakersfield, where the 2 heavy bags were held together with duct tape and the single mirror was cracked diagonally from the upper left corner. That was where Leon Briggs had found her, or more precisely where she had found him, because she had walked in one Tuesday evening after school with the specific, serious expression of someone who had already decided something and was not interested in being talked out of it. Leon was 51 now. In his late 20s, he had been a UFC middleweight contender, a man who had come within 1 fight of a title shot before a torn rotator cuff at 33 ended that particular version of his life. He had spent the 18 years since then in that storage room, and then in a slightly larger room, and then in a proper training facility on the north side of Bakersfield, pouring everything he knew into fighters who still had their window open. Zara was the best one he had ever trained. She knew it. He knew it. The national rankings confirmed it every quarter. She had been fighting out of Steelworks as her secondary training location for the conditioning work, the squat rack, the bag time, the open floor for footwork, while the technical work happened with Leon across town. 8 years she had walked through those glass doors, nodded at whoever was behind the desk, changed in the locker room and gotten to work. 8 years without incident. The gym had been part of her rhythm, the way a specific road is part of a morning run, not the destination, just the necessary ground beneath the feet. There was something else, something she and Leon had decided together not to disclose publicly 3 weeks before that Wednesday afternoon. An MRI had shown a partial meniscus tear in her left knee. Minor, the orthopedist said. Manageable. Cortisone-modified training load, no high-impact lateral cuts for 30 days. The title fight was in 6 weeks. The decision to continue had been hers, made quietly, made completely, and she did not second-guess it. What no one outside her immediate circle knew yet was that this title fight, the one she had been building toward for the better part of a decade, was not simply a national championship. It was the selection event for the first American representative to an inaugural international MMA league, being launched the following year, the first of its kind, with broadcast deals in 14 countries. The stakes were not what the rankings showed. They were considerably larger. She had carried all of this into Steelworks Gym on a Wednesday afternoon in late October, and none of it had been visible on her face because she had learned a long time ago that the work did not require an audience. Cole Hartman had not known any of it. It is unlikely it would have changed anything if he had. That was in its own way the most important part of the story, not what he knew, but what he believed he was entitled to do regardless. Simone Vega had not planned to be at Steelworks Gym that Wednesday. She had planned to be at a youth soccer practice on the east side of Bakersfield, shooting a series she had been working on for 4 months called Time's Women in Motion. Time's a long-form photo documentary about female athletes in the Dodegrees, Central Valley, from pee-wee leagues to adult recreational teams, capturing the specific, unguarded expressions of women in the act of doing something physical and joyful and entirely their own. The soccer coach had called that morning to reschedule, and Simone, who had already packed her bag and was halfway through her first coffee, had decided to go to the gym instead, because the light was good on Wednesday afternoons, and she had been meaning to get some training footage of the general floor atmosphere for a possible sidebar piece. She was 29, freelance, with a portfolio that had been published in 3 regional magazines and once briefly and thrillingly in a national sports quarterly that had since folded. She supported herself through a combination of editorial work, event, photography, and a social media presence that had grown slowly and genuinely to just under 40,000 followers, most of them people who cared about women's sports in ways the mainstream press did not yet reliably reflect. She had been a member at Steelworks for 2 years, which meant she had been in the same room as Cole Hartman and Rick Doyle on approximately a dozen occasions. The first time she had assumed the discomfort she felt in their presence was her own sensitivity. By the third time, she had stopped assuming. 6 months ago, during a session on a Tuesday evening, Hartman had made a comment, as she walked past, that was quiet enough that only she could hear it. Specific enough that there was no charitable interpretation, and delivered with the particular confidence of a man who had never faced a consequence for that kind of language. She had said nothing. She had gone home and sat on her kitchen floor for 20 minutes, and then gotten up and made dinner. She had not reported it because she had been in enough rooms to know what happens when a woman reports something she cannot prove, in a city where the man she is reporting wears a badge. So she had kept training. She had kept her phone in the outer pocket of her gym bag, within reach, which was simply her habit as a photographer, and had been for years. When Zara came back from the water fountain, and Hartman's hand came down, and the sound cracked through the room, Simone's body reacted before her mind had fully processed what had happened. The phone was in her hand. Her thumb found the record button, the way it always found the record button, from muscle memory, from years of capturing moments that would not wait for deliberation. She held it steady at her side, angled upward, and she did not move, and she did not speak. She recorded 4 minutes and 12 seconds of footage. In those 4 minutes and 12 seconds, the camera captured the immediate aftermath of the slap, Hartman's grin, Doyle's laughter, Hartman's words delivered with the ease of a man who expected no resistance. Gary Sutter, looking up from his clipboard, making eye contact with Hartman, and looking back down a gesture that lasted 1 second and said everything. A man on the far side of the gym, seated on a bench, who stood up, appeared to take a step forward, and then stopped, looked around at the room's collective stillness, and sat back down. And Zara Dupree, standing 6 feet from Cole Hartman, her earbud hanging loose at her shoulder. Her face carrying an expression that Simone would later describe in a deposition as the most controlled thing she had ever seen on a human face. When Simone got home that evening, she sat at her kitchen table for a long time. She reviewed the footage twice. She called her sister. She called a friend who worked in media law and asked 3 specific questions and listened carefully to the answers. Then she opened her phone, selected 47 seconds of the footage, enough to show what happened and precise enough to be undeniable, and posted it with a single line of text times. This happened today at a gym in Bakersfield. The man in this video is a Bakersfield police officer. Her name is Zara Dupree. She came here to work. *. She kept the remaining 3 minutes and 25 seconds of footage on a password-protected cloud drive. She told no one about it for 11 days. Zara had made the call from the parking lot standing next to her car with her gym bag over one shoulder and the afternoon sun flat and indifferent above the roofline of the strip mall across the street. Her voice when the dispatcher answered was steady and clear and gave every relevant detail in the order a person gives details when they have been trained to organize information under stress. Her name, the location, what had happened, the name of the person who had done it because she had heard Doyle use it twice inside the gym, asterisk, Cole Times, said with the familiarity of a name that required no last name between them. She had waited in the parking lot for 14 minutes. The responding officer was Sergeant Dale Pruitt, 44 with 20 years on the Bakersfield PD, and the particular demeanor of a man who has spent 2 of those decades perfecting the expression of someone who is listening without actually processing. He had a broad face and small eyes, and he held his notepad with the weary authority of a man performing patience. He took her statement. He asked 3 questions, 2 of which were about what she had been wearing, phrased in the careful, indirect way that is designed to be deniable as an accusation while landing with the full weight of one. She answered both questions in the same flat, even tone she used for the rest of the statement because she had been in enough rooms to know that showing anger at the wrong moment gives people permission to make the anger the story. Pruitt told her the report would be filed and that she would be contacted within 48 hours. She was not contacted within 48 hours. She was not contacted at all. When she called the non-emergency line on the second day to follow up, she was told the report was under review. On the third day, when her attorney, a woman named Patricia Osei, who had been Leon Briggs's recommendation and who charged more per hour than Zara made in a week, submitted a formal records request, they received a document that stopped Patricia mid-sentence on the phone. She called Zara immediately after and read the key details, allowed the name on the file, the timestamp of the closure, and what both of those things meant. The report had been filed under the name Times Sarah Monroe asterisk, not Zara Dupree. Sarah Monroe, a name that matched no one, that existed in no associated database, that would surface in no search, that would connect to no other document, no prior record, no future inquiry, unless someone already knew exactly what they were looking for. It was not a typo. Patricia had reviewed enough official documents to know the difference between a typo and a choice. What neither of them knew yet what Derek Ashton of the Bakersfield Californian would uncover 17 days later through a combination of public records, requests, and a source inside the department who had been waiting for exactly this kind of moment was that Dale Pruitt and Cole Hartman were first cousins, that Pruitt had processed 2 prior internal complaints against Hartman, both of which had been closed within 72 hours, with the notation Times insufficient evidence, asterisk, and that the $8,000 that appeared in Gary Sutter's secondary checking account 3 days after the incident had originated from a limited liability company registered in Fresno to a man named Kevin Hartman, Cole's older brother, whose listed business purpose was Times General Consulting asterisk. The message came through on a Thursday evening, 11 days after the video went up, when the clip had already been viewed 14 million times, and Zara's name had appeared in headlines she had not sought and could not entirely control. It came through the direct message function of her public athletic profile, which Patricia had advised her not to check without legal counsel. Present advice Zara had followed for the first 9 days and then quietly abandoned on the 10th because she was not built for that kind of patience. The message was long. It had clearly been written, deleted, rewritten, and rewritten again. She could feel the starts and stops in it, the places where the language went formal and then broke back into something more raw, the way writing does when a person is fighting their own courage sentence by sentence. The woman's name was Cassidy Lane. She was 32 years old. She taught 3rd grade at an elementary school on the west side of Bakersfield. 2 years ago, on a Tuesday evening in November, she had been walking to her car in the parking lot of a supermarket on Stockdale Highway when Cole Hartman had approached her. She had not known who he was. He had shown her his badge afterward, the way you show something that is both an identification and a warning, both a credential and a threat. She had filed a report 3 days later, after she had convinced herself twice not to, and then decided she did not want to live inside that particular silence. The report had been taken by Sergeant Dale Pruitt. It had been classified as a Times personal dispute, without sufficient physical evidence Times, and closed in 60 hours. Hartman had called her personal cell phone 4 days after the report was closed. He had not said anything threatening. He had said he hoped she was doing well, and that he was sorry there had been a misunderstanding. The call had lasted 47 seconds. She had kept a recording of it for 2 years on a phone she no longer used in a drawer. She opened only when she needed to remind herself that she had not invented it. She had not reported the call. She had stopped going to the Stockdale Highway supermarket. She had developed a specific, exhausting habit of scanning parking lots before walking to her car, a habit she had tried 4 times to stop and had not been able to stop because the body does not forget the things the official record is designed to erase. She had almost not sent the message to Zara. She had written it 8 times. What finally made her send it, she said at the end of the message, it was a single sentence she had read in a news article, a quote from Zara's attorney Times. She was not the first. We intend to make sure she is the last. Asterisk. When Zara read that final paragraph, she sat with it for a while. Then she called Patricia and read the message aloud. Within 72 hours, 4 other women had come forward through channels. Patricia had quietly opened following Cassidy's disclosure. Each story was different in its specifics. Each was the same in its architecture. In every case, the report had been filed. In every case, the report had been buried. In every case, Dale Pruitt had been somewhere in the chain. The 5th woman was the one that broke the chain from the inside. She came forward 3 days after Derek Ashton's piece ran on the front page of the Bakersfield Californian. She had not come forward through Patricia's channels. She had read the article on a Thursday morning, specifically the paragraph that named Dale Pruitt, and described his pattern of closing cases within 72 hours, and she had recognized something in that paragraph that the article could not have known she would recognize. Her name was Linda Voss. She was 43 years old. She had been married to Dale Pruitt for 6 years and divorced from him for 3. She had filed a complaint against Cole Hartman during the marriage, a complaint she had been persuaded to withdraw by her then-husband, who had sat across from her at their kitchen table and explained with the calm of a man who believes he is being reasonable that pursuing it would damage his career, and that there was no version of this that was worth what it would cost. Both of them. She had withdrawn the complaint. She had also, without telling Pruitt, kept a copy of the original filing dated and signed in a fireproof box in her mother's house in Fresno. Derek Ashton had been a staff reporter at the Bakersfield Californian for 9 years, which was long enough to have covered 3 mayoral elections, 2 prison riots, 1 earthquake, and approximately 400 school board meetings that felt longer than all of the above combined. He was 38, lean, in the specific way of someone who forgot to eat during a story, with the habit of carrying a small spiral notebook in his back pocket, even in the age of voice recorders, because he had learned early that people spoke differently when they could see you writing than when they knew they were being recorded, and that the difference was often the most important sentence in the piece. He had seen the Simone Vega video on the morning it went up, before it had reached 1 million views, before it had been picked up by the wire services, before it had become the kind of story that reporters at national outlets began circling with the particular energy of people who have arrived at a scene slightly too late and are trying to reconstruct what they missed. He had opened a new document on his laptop and typed 1 line at the top of it, which he always did, when he sensed a story was larger than its surface times. What is this actually about Times? The surface was the video. A police officer assaulting a woman in a gym, the report buried by a colleague, the department silent. That was the story everyone was writing. Derek spent the first 3 days writing a different question. Times. How many times has this happened before times? The public records requests went out. On day 2, a technique he had learned from a federal investigative reporter who had visited the paper's newsroom 6 years earlier and said, "The single most useful sentence Derek had ever heard in a professional context times file first. Ask questions later because the answer to the question is often in the documents they don't want you to have." Asterisk. On day 4, his source inside the department, a civilian administrative coordinator named Bev, who had worked there for 19 years and whose name would never appear in print, called him on a disposable phone from a gas station on Union Avenue and told him to look at the internal complaint log for the past 4 years, specifically at the closed cases that had been processed by Sergeant Pruitt. On day 7, Derek submitted a supplemental request for financial disclosure records associated with Steelworks Gym and any business entities connected to its ownership. He was sitting in his car in the parking lot of a Denny's on California Avenue when the email came through with Sutter's secondary account activity attached. He read the $8,000 entry twice. He looked up Kevin Hartman's LLC on the California Secretary of State business portal on his phone. He sat in that parking lot for 11 minutes without moving. Then he called his editor, a woman named Carol Finch, who had been running the paper's investigations desk for 16 years, and who had the specific talent of knowing when a reporter had found the load-bearing wall of a story. He told her what he had. She was quiet for 4 seconds, which for Carol was the equivalent of a standing ovation. Asterisk. "How solid is the Pruitt-Hartman connection times?" she asked. Asterisk. Birth records and department employment files both confirm first cousins. Times, he said. Asterisk. Public record. Asterisk. She told him to take whatever time he needed. The piece ran 17 days after the video was posted. A 4,000-word investigation on the front page of the Bakersfield Californian under the headline Times, "A Pattern Not an Incident." Asterisk. By noon, it had been picked up by the Associated Press. By evening, it was on the front page of the Los Angeles Times website. By the following morning, Captain Ron Elias of the Bakersfield PD had called a press conference, and the expression on his face was not the expression of a man performing accountability. It was the expression of a man who had read a 4,000-word article and recognized something in it that most people in the room could not have identified, because most people in the room did not have a 20-year-old daughter who had once sat across from him at a kitchen table in another city and described something that had happened to her that the official record had declined to acknowledge. Captain Ron Elias had been with the Bakersfield PD for 26 years, the last 6, as the commanding officer of the department's investigative division, a position he had reached through a combination of competence, patience, and a fundamental belief tested many times, mostly intact, that institutions could be made better from the inside if enough people inside them cared enough to try. He was 53 with gray at his temples, and the kind of measured public demeanor that press officers loved because it never gave them anything they had not planned for. He had built a reputation as someone who was fair, which in the context of a large municipal police department meant something more complicated than the word suggested. It meant he had made decisions that disappointed people on every side of every argument, which was the only reliable evidence that the decisions were actually fair. He had read Derek Ashton's piece at 5:30 in the morning, sitting at his kitchen table in the house he had lived in for 18 years, with a cup of coffee going cold beside him. He had read it twice. The second time he had thought about his daughter Maya, who was 20 and studying sports medicine at a university in Oregon, and who had called him 14 months ago from her campus apartment on a Sunday night and told him in the careful, measured way she had learned from watching him what had happened to her at a party and how the university's official process had responded to her account of it. He had flown out that week. He had sat with her. He had done everything a father could do and nothing a captain could do because it had happened outside his jurisdiction and inside a system that was not his to change. He had carried that particular weight for 14 months in the specific, compartmentalized way that professional obligations sometimes requires. When he read Derek's piece and saw the architecture of what Pruitt had done, the name misspelling, the closed cases, the quiet coordination, he recognized it not as a surprise, but as a confirmation of something he had suspected for years without sufficient grounds to pursue. He did not call the department's communications office before the press conference. He called Patricia Osei. The conversation lasted 22 minutes. Patricia, who had spent the better part of 3 weeks preparing for a fight, spent the first 30 seconds recalibrating for a conversation that was not the one she had expected. Elias told her 3 things: that he was opening a formal internal affairs review of every complaint processed by Pruitt in the past 4 years, that he was placing Hartman on administrative leave, pending the review, and that he was personally ensuring the original complaint corrected to the name Zara Dupree was reinstated and forwarded to the district attorney's office that afternoon. Patricia wrote all 3 down. She read them back. He confirmed each one. Then she asked him why. There was a pause that lasted long enough to be real. Asterisk. Because my job is to make this department worth working for times, he said. Asterisk. And because I read what happened to the women who came before Miss Dupree and I recognized what I was looking at. Asterisk. It was not a speech. It was said quietly, in the tone of a man who was not interested in credit. Patricia told Zara about the call that evening. Zara listened to the full account without interrupting. When Patricia finished, Zara was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Time's good. Now let's make sure it holds." Asterisk. The full video, 4 minutes and 12 seconds, was submitted to the district attorney's office by Simone's attorney the following morning. The 1 second of Gary Sutter's glance, the silent acknowledgement between him and Hartman captured on film, became the subject of a separate criminal referral for obstruction. The man who had stood up and sat back down a 31-year-old electrician named Jason Warr, who had been coming to Steelworks 3 mornings a week for 2 years, had watched Derek Ashton's article name, Patricia Osei, as Zara's attorney and had looked up the firm's number that same evening and called Patricia's office on his own. He did not need to be found. He had found them. He said he wanted to testify. When Patricia asked him why, he said, "Times. Because I stood up and I sat back down, and I need to stop being that person." Asterisk. The department-wide review opened 17 cases. 4 resulted in terminations. 2 were referred for criminal prosecution. The review was cited the following spring in testimony before the California State Legislature, supporting a bill that would require all citizen complaints against law enforcement to be reviewed by an Independent Civilian Oversight Board. The bill passed in June, 8 months after a Wednesday afternoon in a Bakersfield gym when 23 people found somewhere else to look. The walk from the tunnel to the cage at Crypto.com Arena took approximately 90 seconds. Zara had walked it in her head several hundred times over the preceding 6 weeks, not as visualization exactly, which implied something aspirational, but as preparation. The way you prepare for any terrain you intend to cross with precision. She knew the length of the corridor. She knew where the lights shifted from the fluorescent utility lighting of the back hallway to the full arena production lighting that hit you like a physical thing. She knew the sound would change before she was fully out of the tunnel, that she would hear the crowd before she could see them, and that the sound would hit her chest before it reached her ears. 18,000 people in an arena that had been built for basketball. Reconfigured for tonight. Sold out in 31 minutes when tickets went on sale 6 weeks ago. She had not anticipated that. 31 minutes. Leon had told her over the phone, and she had been in the middle of wrapping her hands, and she had finished the wrap before she said anything, which was the kind of person she was. She wore black trunks and a red sports bra, the same colors she had chosen at 19 because she liked how they looked and had never found a reason to change them. Her left knee was wrapped under her tights in a way that was invisible from outside. The partial tear had been fully disclosed to the Athletic Commission's medical staff, who had reviewed the MRI, consulted with the orthopedist of record, and cleared her to compete with the modified wrap and a documented pain management protocol. The tear was manageable. She had managed it for 6 weeks. She would manage it for 3 more rounds. She walked out at 9:44 p.m. and the noise came in. The way she had expected. Chest first, then ears, then the whole body. And she let it land without doing anything with it, without raising her arms or performing acknowledgement, because she was already inside the focus she needed, and she was not willing to come out of it. Not even for 18,000 people, not even for this. Coach Leon walked 2 steps behind her, his right hand resting briefly on her left shoulder at the point where the tunnel opened into the full arena light, a touch that lasted 1 second and communicated everything they had ever needed to say to each other in a gym at 6 in the morning. In the front row, 3 seats from the aisle, Cassidy Lane sat with her hands folded in her lap and watched Zara walk toward the cage. Zara's team had sent the ticket with a note in Leon's handwriting times. "You weren't alone then. You are not alone now. Come watch." Asterisk. Cassidy had almost not come. She had stood in her apartment in her coat for 12 minutes before deciding. She was here now, and she was sitting straight, 2 rows behind her. Simone Vega held her phone in her hand, not to record. She had made a private decision about that, but simply to hold. The way people hold things when what they are feeling is too large to put down otherwise. Zara Dupree sat in the section reserved for family, alone, except for the empty seat beside her that she had left empty on purpose because some people sit with their absence rather than fill it with substitutes. She watched her daughter walk toward the cage with her chin slightly lifted and her hands quiet in her lap, the posture of a woman who had been proud for a very long time and had learned that pride, at a certain depth, becomes something closer to certainty. The fight lasted 3 rounds. Zara's opponent, Jenna Rourke, was ranked 2nd nationally, had a 3-inch reach advantage, and had not lost in 2 years. She was technically excellent and physically formidable, and had told a reporter the week before in a quote that had been widely circulated that she had not come to be a symbol, she had come to win. The first round was tactical, careful, each fighter reading the other with the focused, ongoing attention of 2 people who have studied each other for months and are now discovering what the study did not capture. The second round shifted. Zara's footwork, the diagonal step, the pivot sequences, the specific geometry that Leon had built into her over 8 years, until it lived below conscious thought, began to show the gap between preparation and talent. By the middle of the 3rd round, Rourke's corner was making adjustments that were not working. The TKO came at 2 minutes and 5 seconds of round 3. Zara stood in the center of the cage, with her arms at her sides and her eyes closed, for exactly 3 seconds, and let the noise of 18,000 people move through her like weather. Then she opened her eyes and walked directly to her opponent and crouched beside her and asked quietly if she was all right. After the decision was announced and the belt was placed around her waist, Jenna Rourke crossed the cage and stood in front of Zara and said something that the arena cameras did not catch, but that Simone, despite her decision, was close enough to lip-read. "Asterisk, fight well times," Rourke said. "Asterisk, both of us deserved a better world to fight in. Asterisk." Zara looked at her for a moment. Then she nodded once the way you nod at something true. Frank Mercer had been calling professional fights for 22 years, which meant he had stood in more cages than he could count and held a microphone in front of more champions than most people saw in a lifetime. And he had developed over those 22 years a finely calibrated sense for the difference between a moment that was large within the context of sport and a moment that was large outside of it. He knew, standing in the center of the Crypto.com arena cage with the microphone in his hand, and the arena slowly settling from the noise of the TKO into something that wanted to hear what came next, that he was inside the second kind. He was 61, with the kind of face that television had made familiar to millions of people who could not have told you his name, and he held the microphone out to Zara, with the particular care of someone who understood that the most important thing he could do in this moment was to get out of the way of it. 6 weeks ago, he said, "Your name was in every headline in the country for something that happened away from this canvas. What does this moment mean to you?" Zara took the microphone. The arena had arrived at the quietest 18,000 people she had ever been, in the presence of a silence so complete it had physical weight. She did not look at Frank Mercer. She looked into the nearest camera, because she understood with precise clarity who she was talking to, not the arena. Not the sports press, not the MMA world. She was talking to the 11 million people who had watched 47 seconds of footage on their phones 6 weeks ago, and to the millions more who were carrying this moment in real time on screens she could not see. Her voice was steady and clear, and required no amplification. "A man put his hands on me without my consent," she said. "And then he used a badge to bury what he did. My report was filed under the wrong name and closed before anyone ever called me back." She paused, not for effect, but because the next sentence required its own space. But Simone Vega had a phone and the courage to use it. And Cassidy Lane, a woman I met a month ago and will know for the rest of my life, finally understood that she was not alone. And a man named Jason Warr walked into an attorney's office and said he wanted to testify because he had stood up once and sat back down, and he was done being that person. She looked into the lens with the same controlled stillness she had carried in a Bakersfield gym 6 weeks ago. The stillness that was not actually stillness. "I had a platform," she said. "I had a trainer who knew journalists. I had an attorney who knew the law. Most women don't have those things. Most women who stand where I stood, in a gym, in a parking lot, in a break room, anywhere, they don't have what I had. And they deserve this just as much as I do. Maybe more." The arena was still. 18,000 people not moving. She looked directly into the lens, and her voice did not change register, did not perform, did not rise into rhetoric. It simply said the thing that needed to be said in the same flat, clear tone she had used in a parking lot 6 weeks ago, when she gave a dispatcher her name and her location and what had happened, because she had been trained to organize information under stress, and she was organizing it now for the largest room she had ever been in. If you see something, say something. Record it. Report it. Refuse to be the person who looks away, because the people who look away are not neutral. They are the room that told him it was okay. And it was never okay. The noise came back slowly. At first, the way noise returns to a room that has been holding its breath, tentative, then building, then all at once, the way things that have been held too long tend to release. Frank Mercer took the microphone back. He held it at his side. He looked at the camera for 3 seconds, with the expression of a man who had covered 22 years of sports and had just watched something that was not finally about sport at all. His producer cut to a wide shot of the arena. Those 3 seconds did not air. Someone in the production truck made a decision, but an audience member in the press section had captured those 3 seconds on a phone before the broadcast cut to commercial, and by morning the clip had been viewed 4 million times. Because people can tell the difference always between a performance of feeling and the real thing, and what Frank Mercer's face showed in those 3 seconds was the real thing. The aftermath moved, the way aftermath always does, not in headlines mostly, but in the quieter, slower spaces between them, in courtrooms and offices and living rooms, and the particular private geography of people learning to carry things differently. Cole Hartman's trial began 11 months after the fight. His attorney entered a not guilty plea that lasted until the 3rd day of proceedings, when the full 4 minutes and 12 seconds of Simone Vega's footage was played in its entirety for the jury, including the 1 second in which Gary Sutter's eyes met Hartman's above the clipboard, and the moment in which a man on the far side of the gym stood up and then sat back down, and the expression on Hartman's face in the seconds after the slap, not guilt, not surprise, but the specific unguarded satisfaction of a man who had done something and expected no consequence for it. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Hartman was convicted of sexual assault and official misconduct. The false name on the police report added a separate charge of obstruction. The sentence was 26 months. The judge in delivering it said one sentence that Derek Ashton quoted in the opening paragraph of his follow-up Peace Times. "This was not culture. This was choice." Dale Pruitt was demoted to patrol officer and transferred to a district on the far north side of the city. The transfer was not, Patricia noted to Zara, a punishment scaled to the harm. It was the kind of outcome that institutions produce when they are trying to appear accountable without fully being it. Gary Sutter was charged with obstruction of justice. Steelworks Gym had its operating license suspended during the proceedings and did not reopen under his ownership. The building sat empty for 3 months. It was purchased in January by a woman named Renee Holloway, who had spent the previous 6 months managing a fitness center in Fresno. Cassidy had sent her the listing without comment 3 weeks after the gym's license was suspended. Renee had looked at it for 2 days and then called a commercial real estate attorney. She was, though this information was not in any press release, the older sister of Cassidy Lane. Renee spent the first month repainting the interior, replacing the broken equipment and posting a harassment policy on every wall, clear specifics signed at the bottom with her name and her title. Cassidy came to see it on the first Saturday after it reopened. She stood in the middle of the floor for a while without saying anything. Then she got on the treadmill and ran for 40 minutes and went home. Captain Ron Elias's department-wide review resulted in 17 cases being reopened, 4 terminations, and 2 criminal referrals. The review became the foundational evidence cited in testimony before the California State Legislature. The bill it supported, the Independent Civilian Oversight Act, passed the following June with bipartisan support, which surprised some people and did not surprise Patricia Osei at all. Derek Ashton received the California Press Association Award for investigative reporting. In his acceptance remark, he said that the story had been reported because a woman named Bev, whose last name he would never print, had called him from a gas station payphone and told him where to look, and that the courage it took to make that call in the professional environment she worked in was larger than anything his byline deserved. Simone Vega received the Riverside Valley Citizen Journalism Award at a ceremony she almost did not attend, and then attended in a green dress. Arriving 12 minutes late and accepted with a short speech that ended times, "I just pressed record. The courage was already there. I just documented it." Cassidy Lane received a civil settlement from the city of Bakersfield and a formal written apology, not a statement to the press, but a letter addressed to her by name, acknowledging specifically what had been done to her and what had been allowed to continue. She framed it, not because it fixed what had been broken, but because it said her name, and because it acknowledged that what had happened to her was real, and because it had taken 2 years and 1 woman loading a barbell on a Wednesday afternoon for that acknowledgement to arrive, and she wanted to remember what that cost. On a morning in the following November at 6:15, when the sky over Bakersfield was the specific gray of dawn before it decides what color it intends to be, Zara Dupree pushed through the glass doors of Steelworks Gym. The ventilation hummed. The new equipment gleamed faintly under the overhead lights. The harassment policy was on the wall, to her left, and she read it once, as she always did now, because Renee had asked her to, and because she believed that reading a thing regularly was how you kept it from becoming wallpaper. She went to the locker room. She set her bag on the bench. She wrapped her hands the way Leon had taught her, methodical, practiced the same sequence she had performed 10,000 times, the same sequence she would perform 10,000 more. She walked out to the main floor. She loaded 185 pounds on the squat rack. She chalked her hands. She set her feet. She checked her position in the mirror, not to be seen, but to be sure, because precision was not vanity. Precision was the work. And she began. There was no one watching. There were no cameras. There were no headlines carrying her name across 100 million screens. There was the bar and the weight and the floor beneath her feet and the gray California morning coming through the windows and the work which had always been the thing she came here to do, the thing that no one's hand had ever actually touched, The thing that had been hers from the beginning and remained hers completely, as it always had been, as it always would be. Power without accountability is not strength. It is cruelty, wearing a uniform, and dignity, the real kind, the kind that lives in the body of a person who has decided who they are, was never his to take. It never is. If this story stayed with you, drop a comment right now and tell me where in the world you are watching from and what time it is there. And if you believe these stories deserve to be told, subscribe, because the next one matters just as much as this one.